Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free, and you'll get updates when the newest interviews drop, which is every couple of days, and we appreciate that. Also, tell your friends, and if you have any suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. Just email me, joshdj57@gmail.com. That's joshdj57@gmail.com. And our conversation continues now with game show author Adam Nedeff. You also did some interviews for the Strong National Museum of Play.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about this.
That.
Yeah, this started at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, May 2020. Again, the aforementioned Bob Bowden reached out to me because he had been in the early talks about this and now wanted to lasso me in on it. The Strong National Museum of Play is based in Rochester, New York, and they are a museum dedicated to the history of play in all its forms. They've got exhibits about dollhouses. They've got exhibits about board games. They've got the National Toy Hall of Fame. They've got the Video Game Hall of Fame. Just all these exhibits, if you played store when you were a kid, they have a miniature supermarket inside the Strong Museum, and it's kid-sized shelves and kid-sized buggies and kid-sized checkout counters, and you can play with the equipment, play with the cash registers, and just the small plastic food and stuff like that. So you can actually play store in a supermarket in the Strong Museum. So it's a wonderful facility, but it's dedicated to play in all its forms. And so Howard Blumenthal, who his father was Norm Blumenthal, who was the producer and the Rebus puzzle artist for 14 years on Concentration for NBC. Mm-hmm. And then Howard himself got into the game show business. Howard, his two big credits are he developed Remote Control for MTV, and he developed Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego for PBS. Howard went to the Strong Museum one day and just asked, do you know anybody in the world of game shows? Have you thought about doing a game show exhibit? And they said, well, no, we don't know anybody in game shows, but we've talked about doing that. And so Howard introduced himself. He got Bob Bowden involved, and Bob got me involved. And so that's led to this project called the National Archives of Game Show History. At the moment, it's only an online presence. But what we're hoping for is in the next few years, get funding and get grants to build a wing of the museum dedicated to the history of game shows. And we're collecting all kinds of props, all kinds of set pieces, behind-the-scenes documents, paperwork from game shows past. Right now, in storage at the Strong Museum, we've got some of the pricing games from The Price is Right that they no longer use. We've got some pieces of the set from The Weakest Link. We've got pieces of a set of Card Sharks. We've got some of the decks of cards from Card Sharks and Gambit. We're amassing this amazing archive of vintage game show set pieces and props and other stuff waiting to be unleashed on the public. But until that happens, what we have online is the National Archives of Game Show History Oral History Series, which is a series of interviews where we sit down with people who've worked in all areas of game show production, not just hosts, but the network executives, the question writers, the producers, everybody who works in every realm of game show production. And we just sit down and we talk to them for hours and hours and hours and pick their brains about the shows they worked on and how they did the work that they did. So I'm very proud of that work, and it's on the Strong Museum website if you go there now, museumofplay.org. You'll be able to find the National Archives of Game Show History there, and you'll be able to listen to all these oral histories and just listen to us getting all these memories from people like Bob Eubanks, like Sandy Stewart, the son of Bob Stewart, who was the creator of all these legendary game shows. And Sandy went to work for his father, and Sandy struck out on his own and started his own production company after that. We've had a chance to interview Susan Simons, who was part of the Compliances and Practices Department at NBC. We've had a chance to talk to Robert Sherman, who developed a lot of the game shows for Goodson Todman for about 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you also interviewed Patty Berry, wife of
and
Jack
Don
Berry.
Enright. Yeah, Patty Berry was Jack's wife, and Don Enright was Dan Enright's son. And we got a chance to talk to them about their memories of how their families were affected by the quiz show scandals and how they picked up the pieces and started over again. And it really was kind of an inspirational, feel-good story, and it was interesting to hear the story that was told from one angle so strongly in the movie Quiz Show, which many people saw, to be able to tell that story from another side and realize, the fallout and how these families were affected and what they went through and what their husbands went through and fathers, trying to rebuild their lives and trying to start over again and trying to run an operation more honestly than they had. and just the impact that it had on everybody was really something. And it's one of my favorite interviews we've ever done. We got a chance to talk to Harry Friedman, who was the executive producer of Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy for many years, and he has a lot of wisdom to offer. So really just extraordinary getting to talk to all these people and getting to figure out how a game show gets put together and the right way to do it from these people who have decades of experience doing that.
Have you gotten to talk to Roger Dobkowitz and Kathy Greco yet?
Roger Dobkowitz, yes. We haven't reached out to Kathy, but Roger Dobkowitz, we had a chance to interview, and at the time we're recording this, it's not been uploaded onto the Strong website, but we do have an interview in cold storage waiting to be unearthed, unleashed on the world with Roger.
That's great. And who else do you want to interview right now that you've not gotten a chance to?
I would love to talk to, because I had a chance to talk to him over the phone a few months ago and found he was a delightful guy and he has a lot of memories. Bob Hilton. Who lives up in mid-California, somewhere near San Francisco now. And he has a lot of great memories about the shows he worked on, so I want to be able to record and preserve those. He's the one that I'm the most excited about of the to-do list, but we have this huge list of about 70 names of people that we want to talk to, and we're going to try to get to every one of them, and I certainly hope we can.
Well, that sounds like a great museum, Adam. I'm looking forward to seeing that wing open. I remember a couple of years ago hearing about it, and gosh, it's just exciting news. And I remember Bob Bone, was it Bob Bone that was joking that his wife says, now we'll finally have a clean living room or something? Now that all the stuff's gone
that's
there.
one of the things that we're learning is there are so many people who have worked in the game show business, and what they all have in common is that all of them have a wife who's been begging them to clean out the basement. So we've gotten so much stuff just basically from people saying, yes, this will finally get her off my back. But
What about Alex Trebek's collection? Because they said he collected everything, it seemed.
Alex had an estate sale a few years ago, and we've not discussed anything, or at least I haven't been involved in discussions about anything out of his collection, but anything's possible.
There we go. And speaking of NBC, Alex Trebek, your brand new book just came out last year. It's been on the bestsellers list on Amazon. Gong This Book.
Yep.
And this has been a multi-year process for you.
Yeah, I started writing this at the end of 2018, and finally got it on the shelves in time for Christmas last year. But yeah, I was approached by another publishing company to write a book about the history of the Gong Show, and I agreed to do that. And then just got jerked around so hard by this publishing company that I said, you know what, I'm going to go to Bear Manor Media. They've been good to me with my other books. They get to have the manuscript. So I turned it over to Bear Manor Media. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun seeing the feedback from this book, seeing the reaction to it. Almost as much fun as putting together the book, which part of the process was doing the detective work and finding the contestants who had been on the show. Now, finding Gong Show contestants is not the easiest thing in the world because so many of them used stage names when they were on the show. So there was a limit to the information that I had access to. One of the things that I was able to come across was rundown sheets for tapings, which was a list of all the acts that were going to be performing for a 5-episode taping, and they listed the performers' actual names on that rundown sheet, but there were only so many of those. So it was very, very hard to find people to interview for this book, but I was able to track down quite a few. And a lot of them had great memories, and what I loved about it, and you'll see this when you read the book, nobody's story about being a contestant on the Gong Show is, well, I decided I'd be a contestant, so I called the number that they showed on the show every day, and they said, yeah, come on in for the audition. Everybody regaled me with the series of wacky misadventures that led to me being a contestant on the Gong Show. Everybody had this unique, fun journey that led to them being on the show. And so it was so much fun listening to all these stories about, here's how I ended up being on the show. And so one entire chapter is just listening to people tell their stories about how they wound up doing this. And it was kind of funny getting the reactions of some people when I reached out to them. I will say there's one person who was not featured in the book because I emailed this person and said, I'd like to talk to you about your experience as a contestant on the Gong Show. And they responded with an email saying, do not mention me in your book at all. The fact that I was on the show is a carefully guarded secret among the people that I know now, and I don't want my name anywhere near that show. I don't want to be associated with it.
Wow.
Okay. And on the other hand, there was a guy that I got a chance to interview.
Don't mention their name,
right.
But is it somebody that's well known if you said their
No,
name?
see, that's the funny thing. It's not a well-known person. It's not a celebrity. But it's just, for some reason, this person is not proud at all of the fact that they were on the Gong Show and is hiding it from the world now. Well, you made the call to go by your real name. It was easy to track you down. So that was one reaction. But on the other hand, you get somebody like a person that I interviewed who takes tremendous pride in the fact that TV Guide called them the worst of the worst. When you look at all the acts that were on the Gong Show, TV Guide had me featured in an article and declared me one of the worst acts ever on the Gong Show, and he was proud of it. You could tell that this guy, this meant something to him, that TV Guide saw fit to single him out and say he's the worst on the Gong Show. So it was really a badge of honor for him, and just the fact that he had that attitude and that mindset about it really put a smile on my face. But my favorite story that I got out of talking to people in that book, Chuck was very fond of an act called Count Banjola. Count Banjola was a guy who played the banjo and could do it hanging upside down. And the whole story of how he got on the show was just a total bluff from the very beginning. All he could do was play the banjo. And he could play it skillfully. I don't want to say all he could do. But the whole point of this is, he realized what the Gong Show was, and he was like, okay, there has to be more to it than this. I can't just go on stage and play the banjo, because so many people audition for the Gong Show, that's going to fall through the cracks. So he just told a total lie to the person who answered the phone from the Gong Show, and he says, and I can do it hanging upside down, which he had never done in his life. But they said, okay, you go ahead and we'll do it hanging upside down. And he thought it would be extra funny if I wore a tuxedo to the audition, and it crossed his mind, okay, if I'm wearing a tuxedo and I'm hanging upside down, I'm a vampire. So when he went in for the audition, he said, I'm Count Banjola. I'm the banjo-playing vampire. And he played the banjo while hanging upside down from the ceiling. So he's on the show, and decades passed, and he got married late in life. He got married in his late 1950s, in his late 50s, I should say. And when he met his now wife and things started to get serious between them, they had some kind of conversation about stories from their past they hadn't told yet. And he says, okay, I have to confess something to you. There's a little thing that I haven't told you yet. He said, I was a contestant on the Gong Show. I was a banjo-playing vampire. And he said his now wife rolled her eyes at him and said, I know. And he said, how did you know? And she says, you don't remember me. I was there with my mother, who was one of the other contestants that day. And she said, I kind of had a little crush on you, and I never forgot you.
Wow.
So Mrs. Count Banjola is the all-time grand champion of playing the long game.
Yeah.
So, yeah. A really nice happily ever after there. And both I got a chance to talk to he and his wife, and both of them were just very charming people and a lot of fun to talk with.
Now, you said there were a bunch of, for instance, the Popsicle Twins. You were never able to locate them.
I was never able to track them down. Yeah, there was an infamous act on the Gong Show. The actual name of the act was Have You Got a Nickel? But anybody who knows what the act was tends to call them the Popsicle Twins. And there's nothing out there about them. I didn't have the rundown sheet from the taping that they did. And nobody on the show could remember their real names. Because, again, this goes back to it was just their jobs. So this very shocking, very offensive act that didn't air on half of NBC stations because the network was so upset by the segment. And nobody on Chuck Barrett's staff had any memory of these women's names because it was just one of 45 acts that they went through at that Gong Show taping. The only Larry Spencer, who appeared on the Gong Show a few times, and he was Chuck's writer, Larry said the only thing I remembered about them was I stopped one of them on the way out the door and asked her out on a date. And she said no, and he says that's the only thing I remember. I don't even remember their names anymore, but I remember I made it a point to ask one of them on a date before they left.
I was wondering, now that the book has been released, has either one of them reached out to you?
No, neither one of them has reached out to me, but I'll tell you what's annoyed me was I've made contact with Gene the Dancing Machine's family, and what irks me about that is they were hiding in plain sight because I had the obituary and I had the names of his family, so I did the simplest form of detective work, which was I went around Facebook and went looking through the Facebook accounts of people who had those names, and I couldn't find them. And then after the book came out, they posted a message just on my Facebook page, and I went hunting through them, and it's not only are they Gene the Dancing Machine's children, they're obviously Gene the Dancing Machine's children because there are photos of him all over their Facebook pages.
Wow.
And for some reason, they weren't coming up in the search results when I was looking for them.
Man.
So these people who would have been just critical interviews when I was working on the book, for some reason, the Facebook algorithm, we love blaming that, and I'll be happy to blame it now.
Yeah.
But I could not find these people while I was working on the book, and then they came right to the surface as soon as the book came out. And,
man.
That's life.
Yeah, Gene the Dancing Machine, Gene Patton, shopped at the Hughes Market in Pasadena I worked at in the early to mid-'90s. And Paul Rodriguez also shopped there. Bob Reed from the Brady Bunch, he lived in Pasadena too. And so when the checker said, Gene works here, shops here. I was like, really? And so I was getting impatient one day, and I said to the checker, hey, Mary, has Gene the Dancing Machine been here lately? And she said, his wife's in the next checkout lane, and his wife's like, but then I finally got to meet him a couple weeks later. It's just really nice. Yeah. And I said, I'm begging Gene's groceries. Thank you very much. Well, I wasn't that mean, but I was like, move
out of the way. Yeah, this is my part. No, I was like that when I was an usher at the Pantages Theater. When I was an usher at the Pantages Theater, I'd recognize certain people, and I was like, okay. We were all told on the first day, it's the first thing you tell theater ushers when you're working at a Hollywood theater. You are going to cross paths with famous people. Act like a normal person around them and be sane. So I was always good at that. But my boss said what was so funny is, my boss took me aside one night and he said, Adam, I've seen you here on nights when Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise have been in the building, and you didn't bat an eye when you saw those guys. But every now and then you'll walk up to me and say, Steve, guess who's at the Pantages Theater tonight? And I know I'm about to hear a name that I've never heard in my life. You are excited over the most esoteric people.
Well, it's true. I worked at the Civic Auditorium for about 2.5 years, and that's, at the time, it was the Emmy Awards location. Yeah. And our boss said, remember, these stars put their pants on one leg at a time, just like we do. But yeah, I got to, I saw Betty White there. I gave her a pamphlet when she entered in 1992. I got to see the actor who played Steven's older brother, Rob, on Family Ties. He was a really cool guy. I got to say hi to Marvin Kaplan. Jay Thomas probably was the funniest one because a bunch of them were in the lobby during the show, and they were told to quiet down so it didn't carry over into the auditorium. So my boss said, make sure to tell them to quiet down. I was like, so I went to Jay Thomas's group. I was like, can you guys please quiet it down? And Jay Thomas was like, damn it, he started it. And I lost it. I was like, okay, I'm laughing. I don't care what my boss says. It was just too funny. At the time, he was mornings on Power 106, which was the #1 station in L.A. at the time. Yeah. That was before they were hip hop. It was more like, like Stacey Q and Debbie Gibson and Tiffany and Janet Jackson type of music. Yeah. And Paul Schaefer was also really nice. But yeah, I try to, a lot of them I didn't know, but then some I did recognize off the top of my head. But it's like, just like they said, just one leg at a time. I'm kind of glad there were no game show hosts there that night. Otherwise, I probably would have lost my job. Yeah. The closest I got was Betty White.
Yeah, I was very excited because there was a night at the Pantages Theater where Drew Carey, Rich Fields, and Jonathan Mangum were all there. Wow! And so it was game show night at the Pantages. There was another night where it was just every '70s panelist from Celebrity Sweepstakes and Match Game was in the theater. Wow! And it just felt like we had a game of Hollywood Squares getting ready to break out in the theater. Yeah, so those are the people that I always got excited about. I would see Orson Bean and his wife,
Allie Mills.
Yeah. And it was the first thing I told them when I got a chance to interview Orson Bean was, "Hey, I showed you to your seat at the Pantages Theater." And Orson made me a sandwich the one time I met him.
That's right. Tell me about that.
Yeah, you were nice enough to put me in contact with Orson Bean when I was working on my book about Gene Rayburn, and I called Orson Bean to schedule a phone interview. I had phone in mind, but Orson said, no, come on over to the house. What's a good day for you? When's your next day off from work? I said, okay, yeah, come on over to my house this day. So I went over to Orson's house, and Orson brings me inside, and he sits me down and he in the kitchen, and he says, so what do you want for lunch? Do you want roast beef or ham? And I said, oh, no, I'll eat something on the way out. And he says, no, you got to eat something. You want roast beef or ham? And I said, I'll have roast beef. And he pulls all these ingredients, and he makes like a restaurant quality sandwich for me. It's not just a roast beef sandwich. He had all these different kinds of cheeses. He gave me my option for cheese. He had lettuce. He had brown mustard. I had a really good sandwich from Orson Bean. Orson Bean, who had known me for 2 minutes, had made me the best sandwich of my life. So yeah, that was my keeper memory from that. And then he just cold called me out of the blue to say he really enjoyed my biography of Bill Cullen. And this is a thing that I've never become good at, and it's just one life regret after another. I never maintain relationships with these people because I'm afraid of being a nuisance or a bother, and I don't want to come off as... There's a slang term that starts with the word star that I don't want attached to me. So I'm always very mindful of that. So that's a relationship that I never did anything with, even though Orson received me so warmly and was so nice to me that I never felt uncomfortable around him. I felt totally well received by him by that. But that's the thing. There was never a second day at Orson Bean's house because I've never learned how to follow through on something like that.
Yeah.
Keep that foot in the door.
I tried booking him for Stu's show, and I just wasn't able to really break on through. And that was one thing I regret not being able to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad I got to interview with you for your book and stuff.
He was great, yeah.
But it would have been really cool if he had been on Stu's show as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, that's life, and that's not even an isolated example. There are other instances of me hitting it off with a well-known person, but just not being able to bring myself to say, hey, let's stay in touch, because I don't want to be that guy, and I don't want to seem like it's really hard to figure out that line.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. I mean, especially even with the people I've interviewed for the podcast here, those who I've just kind of met out of the blue. Sometimes I'll just email Randy Merkin, who was the longtime operations manager of ESPN 1000 in Chicago. Mm-hmm. He said it's good to keep in contact with those who you but then again, like you said, it's kind of hard. Where do you kind of like, balance that line, if you will? Yeah. So. But it was a good point. I mean, I hadn't really thought about that, but he's right. But how do you do it, and how do you really, okay, what do I talk to them about if I do keep in contact?
Yeah. And how do you do it and look sane? I mean, it is tricky.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
We're talking with game show author Adam Nedeff. He's the author of over a dozen books on game shows, and he's also worked on over a dozen game shows. They include Split Second, Tug of Words, where he's the head researcher. The other game show he was the game judge as well as head researcher on was Masterminds. And also, he worked on the Gong Show as the researcher. Now, this was the 2017 version. We've been talking about the classic era of the Gong Show from 1976 to 1980. And next time, we'll talk about more stories from Adam's latest publication and his best-selling so far, Gong This Book.